The table cracked beneath the force of his fist as he tore Randall's hand from my arm. His voice was fire. "You will never touch her again." Around us, power, money, and lies crumbled, but all I could hear was the truth in his fury. He had seen me. The invisible girl. The ruined name. The heart no one wanted. And from that moment on, nothing could ever make me unseen again.
The chandeliers glimmered like frozen stars suspended above the ballroom, each crystal prism catching the light and scattering it across polished marble floors. The string quartet at the far end played a lilting waltz, sweet and delicate, but the air itself was thick with perfumes, ambition, and carefully concealed envy. Laughter rose and fell like waves. Polished shoes glided, silken skirts rustled, and everywhere there was the sense of spectacle. Everyone was watching, and everyone longed to be watched in return. Everyone but Annette. She lingered near the edges of the great hall, where shadows gathered between gilded columns. Her cousin Monica was a vision of glittering crimson silk, holding court with a circle of men who smiled too broadly at her practiced jokes. Monica barely spared Annette a glance, save for a sharp look to remind her why she was here, to accompany, to carry a shawl, to be the polite cousin who faded into the background while Monica shone like a jewel. Annette's dress was not a jewel. It was a relic, a hand-me-down gown, its pale lavender fabric worn thin at the seams, its lace sleeves patched more than once. She had done her best to stitch it into decency, but compared to the gowns glittering around her, it looked like faded wallpaper in a palace filled with mirrors. She tugged at the bodice, praying it held together until the night was over. She did not want eyes on her, and yet in the deepest, most secret part of her heart, she longed for it. She wanted to be seen, not pitied, not mocked. Seen, for who she was, and not for what her family had lost when her father's fortune crumbled into dust. She had buried that desire long ago, convincing herself it was safer never to want. Yet as she stood among diamonds and silk, as the orchestra swelled and Monica basked in the glow of noblemen's attention, the ache returned, sharp and hungry. The ache of being invisible. A hush fell over the room. It was subtle at first, like a ripple through still water. Laughter softened, the music seemed to bend, and all eyes turned toward the double doors at the head of the ballroom. A name swept through the air on whispers. The Duke. Desmond. Annette had heard of him, as everyone had. He was the man whispered about in salons and council chambers, a figure as feared as he was admired. His fortune had been built on ruthless precision, swallowing rivals whole, leaving empires shattered in his wake. Some said those who crossed him vanished not just from business, but from society entirely. Others claimed women who caught his eye were forever marked, ruined, adored, discarded, whispered about until their names were footnotes of scandal. Now he was here. He entered with the slow confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. Tall, broad-shouldered, his black coat cut to perfection, his presence commanded silence more effectively than any announcement could. The orchestra faltered for a heartbeat before continuing, as though even musicians were not immune to his shadow. His gaze swept across the ballroom, cold and sharp as winter steel. Annette's heart gave a nervous flutter. She pressed closer to the column at her side, willing herself smaller, more hidden. He would not notice her. He never noticed women like her. Why should he? His eyes belonged to heiresses in sapphire silk and ladies dripping with emeralds, to the ones who waited for him with half-masked smiles and desperate ambition. And indeed he moved past them, their jewelled hands reaching, their laughter ringing a little too loudly as he passed. He seemed immune to their charms. His expression did not shift. His dark eyes cut through them, dismissing one after another, until at last his gaze slid to where Annette stood half hidden in shadow. Her breath caught. He was looking at her. For one disbelieving moment she thought perhaps she had imagined it, that his gaze had passed over her on its way to someone brighter. But no. His steps shifted, slow and deliberate, carrying him through the throng of silks and jewels until he was in front of her. The chatter behind him rose in a startled wave. Monica's laughter faltered mid-sentence. The Duke had stopped before no one else. Only her. Annette's pulse thundered in her ears. Her instinct screamed, "Lower your gaze, hide, vanish before it's too late." But her body betrayed her. She looked up into eyes that were dark as storm-tossed seas and found herself unable to move. He leaned closer, close enough that his presence filled the air around her, close enough that she could catch the faint scent of leather and smoke clinging to him. His voice cut through the music, low and silken, a blade wrapped in velvet. "I see you." The words were simple, and yet they sliced straight through her, shattering the fragile defences she had built for years. She had not been seen in so long, not truly. She had been tolerated, ignored, dismissed, but not seen. Now, in front of everyone, the most feared man in the kingdom had spoken, and it was to her. And then he did what no one expected. In full view of the entire ballroom, Desmond extended his hand, not as though offering charity, but as though demanding. His gaze did not waver, his stance left no room for refusal. The gesture was not an invitation, it was possession. A silent declaration. "This one is mine." Whispers erupted across the ballroom, fans snapped shut, glasses trembled in hands, and noble mouths fell open in shock. To take her hand would mean stepping into a storm she could never escape. To refuse would mean challenging the most dangerous man in the room. Monica's jewelled fan snapped closed with a sharp flick, her face pale with disbelief. But Annette barely heard any of it. Her heart beat too fast, her world tilting around those 3 words and the hand outstretched before her. For the first time, she was not invisible. She was claimed, before the eyes of the world. But to be claimed by him was not salvation. It was a summons into a world of danger, power and obsession. One where being noticed by the Duke was not a gift. It was a peril that could either save her or destroy her completely. Would you want to be noticed by a man feared by everyone else? Yes or no? Leave a comment. Annette's days blended into one another like the pale threads she used to patch old fabric. There was no colour, no thrill, just the muted rhythm of invisibility. Each morning she rose before the rest of the household stirred, folding her blanket with care and smoothing her simple mattress so her aunt would not scold her for slovenliness. Her chamber was scarcely bigger than a closet, with a cracked mirror and a single trunk, but she treated it as a refuge. It was the one place in the sprawling estate where she could breathe without being judged. By the time she descended to the breakfast table, Monica would already be seated in a gown chosen for how it flattered her complexion in the morning light, her laugh loud and deliberate. Their aunt poured tea with a delicate flourish, their uncle buried his nose in the Gazette, and Annette slipped into her chair quietly, reaching for bread without drawing attention. It was always the same. She existed at the table, but she was never of it. "Annette, pass the jam," Monica would say, her tone bright enough for the family to hear, but her eyes sharp with warning. "Remember your place." Annette passed it obediently, never daring to correct her cousin when she exaggerated last night's compliments or fabricated praise she'd never received. After breakfast, Monica often pulled her along into town. They would stroll arm in arm, but it was not closeness. It was display. Annette was the shadow that made Monica's glitter shine brighter. At the dressmaker's, Monica would hold bolts of silk against her skin, tilting her head to ask the shopgirl's opinions while Annette hovered in the background. If she ventured a suggestion, Monica dismissed it with a laugh. "Don't listen to her. She hasn't worn anything fashionable in years." The shopgirls giggled obligingly, and Annette smiled faintly, swallowing the sting. By afternoon, Monica would entertain suitors in the drawing room, her laughter pitched just high enough to reach Annette upstairs. That was when Annette stole to the servants' quarters, where the air smelled of starch and lavender soap, and where Lucille folded linen with her sleeves rolled to her elbows. Lucille was the one person in the house who saw her, not as a burden, not as a faded accessory to Monica's glow, but as herself. She always looked up with a smile, pressing a sugared roll into Annette's hands if she had one hidden away. "You're too thin," she would scold gently. "One day you'll blow away with the wind." Annette would laugh softly, grateful for the kindness. In Lucille's company, her defences slipped. Sometimes, while the sound of Monica's tinkling laughter drifted through the halls, Annette whispered the secret lodged in her heart. "I just want to matter. To someone. To be chosen, even once." Lucille always touched her hand in return. "You already matter more than you know. But this world doesn't always see clearly." Annette would nod, but the longing never faded. Desire and fear wove themselves together in her chest like threads she could not untangle. To be seen would mean stepping into the fire, but to remain invisible was to wither slowly in the dark. Desmond's days, too, followed a pattern, though his was carved in steel rather than shadows. At dawn, his household moved with military precision. Servants rose early, boots clicked across polished floors, carriages came and went. In his study, behind tall windows always veiled by heavy curtains, he examined ledgers, maps and contracts with unyielding focus. He had built his empire on ruthlessness. Rivals who underestimated him were swallowed whole. Properties changed hands, fortunes collapsed, and the Duke's name was stamped over all of it. His reputation was both his weapon and his armour, feared in council chambers, whispered about in drawing rooms, admired by those who benefited from his victories, and hated by those who lost. In society, women adorned in silks and jewels tilted toward him like flowers to the sun. They whispered promises, fluttered lashes, and pretended not to mind the rumours of destruction that clung to him. Desmond received their attentions with polite indifference. His dark eyes gave nothing away, his smile rare, his interest non-existent. He left them frustrated, confused, and secretly desperate to be the one who thawed his ice. But Desmond's mask concealed more than coldness. In the evenings, when the house grew still, he sometimes sat alone by the fire, his cane resting against the chair, a glass of brandy untouched at his side. The flames illuminated the empty chair opposite him, and with it, the ghost of a woman who had once occupied it, his lost fiancée. Her betrayal had cut so deeply that even years later the wound had not closed. Her laughter sometimes echoed in his memory, crueler than any rival's blade. It was why he had built his walls so high, why he had sworn never again to trust beauty, never again to give his heart away. Yet, despite himself, he knew the names of every family that still dared to move within his circles. He remembered histories, debts, betrayals. And among those memories was the story of the Sinclair family, once wealthy, now ruined. He knew of the uncle who had taken in the poor relation, the cousin who paraded in society, and the quiet shadow who followed her. Annette Sinclair. Others orbited their lives, already shaping the storm to come. Monica, with her ambition as bright and sharp as her crimson gowns, thought of little else but climbing higher. Her cousin's presence was a nuisance, a reminder of fragility she could not afford. If Annette ever threatened her spotlight, Monica would not hesitate to strike. Randall, charming and polished, moved through society with ease. His compliments were honey, his eyes calculating. He had crossed Desmond in business before, and though he smiled when he spoke the Duke's name, he carried the bitterness of defeat. Lucille, by contrast, was unremarkable to society, but invaluable to Annette. She was the steady rhythm in a life of humiliation, the gentle tether that kept Annette from despair. Without her, Annette might have crumbled long ago. This was their pattern. Annette's muted days, lived in the shadow of a cousin who belittled her. Desmond's icy routines, haunted by loss and sharpened by power. Monica's vanity, Randall's schemes, Lucille's loyalty. It was ordinary, if suffocating. Predictable, if painful. And it might have gone on that way for years, if not for the gala. One night, one gathering, one moment when a girl who had mastered invisibility dared to lift her eyes and found herself seen by the most dangerous man in the room. The orchestra's strings swelled, but no one moved to the dance floor. The hush from the Duke's claim still trembled through the ballroom like the aftershock of a storm. Annette's fingers tingled where his gloved hand had held hers. She wanted to breathe, to vanish, but Desmond had not released her from his gaze. Then, without preamble, his voice cut across the stunned silence. "Dance with me." It was not a request. Gasps broke like glass around them. Mothers clutched pearls, fathers whispered hurried calculations of alliances, and Monica's lips parted in visible outrage. To invite Annette, the poor cousin in a lavender relic, was an affront to every jewelled heiress who had polished her smile for this night. Annette's heart pounded in her ears. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to protest, to say she did not belong. But his arm was already outstretched, his presence filling the space around her, leaving no room for retreat. Against every instinct, she placed her trembling hand on his sleeve. He led her into the centre of the ballroom, the sea of faces parting in disbelief. The violins stuttered, then caught again, sliding into a waltz that seemed too delicate for the weight of the moment. Desmond's hand rested lightly at her waist. His grip was firm, controlled, and though his face betrayed nothing, Annette felt the shift of his focus. His steps were measured, his body heat steady, drawing her into the rhythm even as her mind screamed for escape. "You hide in shadows," he murmured, his voice a low current against her ear. "Why?" Annette swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Because shadows are safe." His dark eyes searched hers. "Safe is another word for unseen. And I do not dance with ghosts." Her pulse leapt. She looked away, unable to bear the intensity, yet her body moved with his as though pulled by invisible strings. In his arms, she felt herself caught between terror and something dangerously close to wonder. For the first time, she wasn't simply enduring the moment. She was part of it. Around them, whispers spread like wildfire. "The Duke never dances. Not since." The words were drowned in gasps and speculation. At the edge of the floor, Monica's fan snapped open again, hiding her expression but not the venom in her eyes. When the music ended, Desmond bowed with precise formality, releasing her hand only after the weight of his claim was sealed in every onlooker's mind. Annette curtsied awkwardly, her breath unsteady. The room erupted in murmurs. And then Randall appeared. He materialized from the crowd with a smile too smooth, his blonde hair gleaming under the chandeliers. "Miss Sinclair," he said, bowing just low enough to mock. A surprising turn indeed. His eyes flicked toward Desmond, narrowing slightly before returning to her. But then, surprises in this world rarely end well. Annette stiffened. "Excuse me." She tried to move past him, but he stepped neatly into her path. "Be cautious," he said, his voice pitched low. "The Duke ruins every woman he touches. Some fade away. Others are left clinging to the scraps of what they once were. Don't let your name join theirs." She met his gaze, summoning courage she did not feel. Better to risk ruin than to be manipulated by charm. For the first time, Randall's smile faltered. His eyes cooled, his voice sharpening. "We'll see if you still believe that when the whispers cut deeper." Desmond's shadow fell over them, his gaze enough to send Randall retreating with a stiff bow. But the seed of warning had already been planted, and Annette's heart ached with confusion. Later, when the gala ended, Annette sat silent in the carriage, Monica seething across from her. "You made a fool of me," Monica hissed. "Do you think he truly sees you? He doesn't. You are nothing but a toy to men like him. A flicker of interest until the novelty fades, and when it does, do not crawl back to me expecting pity." Annette turned her face to the window, the city lamps streaking past like falling stars. Her heart burned, torn between fear of Monica's venom and the memory of Desmond's voice whispering, "I do not dance with ghosts." The next morning, Annette's fragile world collapsed. She woke to Lucille pounding at her chamber door, her face pale as parchment when Annette opened it. "You must see this," Lucille whispered, thrusting a folded newspaper into her hands. Annette's eyes skimmed the inked letters on the front page. Her breath caught. The Duke's mystery woman, Annette Sinclair. Stuns at Winter Gala. Her name blazed across the column, her family history dragged into the light, the once wealthy Sinclairs, their ruin, their forgotten ward now thrust into the spotlight by the most feared man in the city. Speculation ran wild. Was she his mistress, his betrothed, a pawn in his ruthless games? Annette's hands shook as she lowered the paper. "No," she whispered. "This will destroy me." Her one source of survival, her quiet tutoring of 2 neighbourhood children for coins, would not survive this scandal. Respectable families would not trust a woman splashed across gossip sheets as a duke's scandalous choice. Lucille clasped her hand. "We'll weather it somehow." But Annette's fear tightened in her chest, choking her. To be invisible was safety, to be seen was danger, and now she was no longer invisible. Across the city, Desmond folded the same paper with measured precision. He had expected whispers. He had not expected her name to scream from headlines. His jaw tightened as he stared into the fire. It had begun. If your name suddenly blazed across every paper because of someone else's choices, would you hide in shame or fight to reclaim your story? Share your thoughts below. Annette thought that once the papers cooled, the world would forget her, but the opposite happened. Within days, her name travelled on every painted fan, in every whispered circle. The Duke's mystery woman. Poor Sinclair girl, angling for a crown. Did you see her dress? Pathetic, really. A man like him could do better. The sting of mockery clung to her wherever she went. At the small schoolroom where she taught children their letters, she noticed mothers glance toward her with raised brows, whispering before whisking their children away more quickly than usual. Within a week, 2 families cancelled their lessons entirely. She knew the reason. No respectable parent wished their child near a woman accused of chasing after a ruthless duke. And yet, Desmond did not disappear. The first time he arrived at the modest tutoring hall in person, his carriage gleaming black in the midday light. She had nearly dropped her chalk when the door opened and he filled the frame, his broad shoulders dwarfing the room. The children gasped, their little mouths forming ovals of awe. Annette's heart stumbled in her chest. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, rushing forward before Lucille could scold the children for staring. His lips curved faintly, though his eyes remained cool. "Why not?" "Because every look, every step you take toward me feeds their cruelty." "Then let them speak," he replied smoothly. "They have always spoken, and I have always endured. You can too." But Annette shook her head, fear curling in her chest. "You don't understand. I have no armor, no title, no protection." He studied her for a long moment, then lowered his voice. "You are not as unprotected as you believe." The gifts began soon after. A book of poetry, bound in soft leather, left on her doorstep. A silk scarf, embroidered with violets, her favourite flower. A ruby pendant, too extravagant for her to even touch without trembling. Annette returned the last to his messenger, with a note written in her careful hand. "Please stop. I cannot bear the cost of your attention." But the next evening, when she looked out her window, she saw him standing on the street, cloak pulled tight, watching silently as though ensuring her safety. He didn't approach. He didn't need to. The sight of him alone made her breath hitch and her pulse quicken. What had drawn him to her? The question burned in her. She remembered the ball, the way his gaze had cut through the jewelled crowd and landed on her like a spark against dry kindling. She had not spoken, had not performed, had not sought his notice. And perhaps that was it. She had not wanted him. She had not begged for his approval. And in that absence of hunger, he had found a flicker of truth he hadn't known he craved. But surely that could not be enough. Could it? The obstacles pressed harder. At a gathering Monica forced her to attend, Annette stood quietly at her cousin's side when a group of ladies descended. Their gowns glittered, their smiles sharp. "Annette Sinclair," one crooned, her eyes narrowing. "The Duke's little charity project. How very fortunate for you." Monica laughed too loudly. "Fortunate indeed. My cousin has always had a knack for stumbling where she doesn't belong." Heat scorched Annette's face. She wanted to leave, but Monica's hand on her arm was iron. "Stay," her cousin hissed, still smiling at the others. "If you run, you only prove them right." Annette endured their barbs until her throat ached with swallowed tears. When she slipped away at last, she found herself in the shadowed garden where the air was sharp with roses and cold night. There, to her shame, she found him waiting. Desmond. "You saw that," she said hoarsely, wrapping her arms around herself. "I saw." His jaw was tight, his eyes glinting with something between fury and regret. "Why do you do this?" she whispered. "Why not choose someone who could bear it, someone trained for this world?" For the first time his mask cracked. He stepped closer, tilting his head so the moonlight revealed the scar just beneath his hairline, a faint jagged line running into his temple. She gasped softly, instinctively reaching before she stopped herself. "It was not business that carved this," he said quietly. "It was betrayal. The woman I thought I would marry, she left me with this scar, and the lesson that I would never again be weak for someone." Annette's breath caught. Then why risk weakness now? He held her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Because when you stood in that ballroom, you did not see my wealth, my power, my ruin. You looked at me, and for a moment I was a man again. Not a duke, not a monster. A man." The air thickened between them. Her heart pounded, her chest aching with the dangerous temptation of his truth. But not everyone would allow the fragile connection to deepen. Randall appeared at the edge of her world, always too polished, always too near. At the market, at the walkways, at the gatherings Monica dragged her to. His words were always poison wrapped in silk. "He will use you," Randall whispered once, leaning close as if speaking a secret meant only for her. "When he is finished, you'll be the next sad story in every paper. Let me help you escape before that happens." Annette's chin lifted, though her voice shook. "I do not need your help." He smiled coldly. "We'll see." The pressure built with every passing day. The world branded her a fortune hunter, a fool, a naive girl doomed to destruction. Monica's cruelty sharpened, Randall's manipulation pressed, society's whispers cut deeper. And yet, whenever Desmond drew near, her resistance faltered. She could not ignore the steady way he watched her, as if memorizing her every movement. She could not forget the scar revealed beneath moonlight, or the way his hand had lingered against her back when he warned her softly, "If you stay near me, they will come for you too." It was a warning. It was also a promise. And though fear burned in her chest, so too did a reckless, dangerous hope. Would you push him away, or risk everything to stay? The days blurred into weeks, and still the storm around Annette did not quiet. If anything, the whispers grew sharper, the scrutiny more relentless. Yet in those same weeks, Desmond's presence became an unshakable shadow in her life. He appeared at her tutoring hall, at markets, even once at Lucille's humble kitchen table, listening in silence as Annette tried to scold him for endangering her peace. And though she told him again and again to leave her be, her pulse betrayed her each time his eyes locked with hers. It was in those stolen moments, the flicker of warmth in his gaze, the scar revealed beneath his dark hair, the softness in his voice when he let his guard slip, that Annette felt something shift in her. Attraction was dangerous, but it was real. Still, beneath the fragile thread pulling them closer, something darker moved unseen. One afternoon, Monica swept into Annette's chamber, cheeks flushed with glee. "Look what the papers print today," she announced, tossing a folded sheet onto Annette's bed. Annette smoothed it open. At first her breath caught at the familiar sight, her name again in bold print. But this time it was not the usual cruel speculation. It was a story about her family, about the Sinclairs. She read aloud in a whisper. The once prosperous Sinclair line fell to ruin after a series of failed investments and broken trusts. Debts tied mysteriously to ventures backed by Randall Hayes. Her blood chilled. She read the line again and again. Randall. It had always been told differently. Her father's recklessness, bad luck, misfortune at the hands of fate. But here, in ink, were claims that suggested sabotage. Monica's smile was sharp. Do you see now? You're not even a victim of chance. You're collateral in someone else's game. She leaned in, voice dripping poison. And you thought the Duke would rescue you. He knew, he's known all along. Why do you think he watches you with those eyes? Not love, Annette. Guilt. Annette froze. What did you say? Ask him yourself, Monica said with satisfaction, sweeping out of the chamber, her skirts rustling like laughter. The confrontation came that night. Desmond found her in the garden behind the estate, sitting rigid on a stone bench, the newspaper clenched in her lap. The lamplight flickered across her pale face, her eyes like storm clouds. You knew, she whispered as soon as he approached. He stopped, the night air heavy between them. Annette. You knew my family's downfall wasn't misfortune, that it was orchestrated, that Randall's hand was in it. Her voice cracked. And you said nothing. His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, but she rose to her feet, backing away. I've always believed my family was weak, foolish. You let me carry that shame while you knew the truth. I had no proof, Desmond said quietly, his tone low, steady, but edged with pain. Rumours, whispers. Nothing I could use to bring him down without dragging you further into ruin. I meant to protect you until I was certain. Her laugh broke, brittle and wounded. Protect me? You've destroyed me. Every choice I've made since that night has been under the shadow of your silence. His eyes darkened. He closed the distance, his voice rougher now. Do you think it was easy to hold back? To watch you shrink beneath shame you never deserved? Every time you lowered your gaze, every time you whispered that you were nothing I wanted to tell you, but to reveal it without proof would have given him the power to twist it against us both. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, tears burning her lashes. And what am I to you, Desmond? A pawn? A liability? Or simply a reminder of all that you've lost? For a heartbeat, his mask shattered. His hand lifted, hovering just short of her cheek. You are the one thing I cannot turn away from. His voice broke on the last words, raw and unguarded. The silence between them trembled, thick with anger, betrayal, and something more dangerous still. Annette's breath shuddered. Her heart told her to run. Her body betrayed her, leaning into the warmth of him. I hate you, she whispered, though her voice was soft, trembling with contradictions. Then hate me, he murmured, finally brushing his thumb against her cheek, but don't deny this. And before she could stop herself, her lips met his. It was not gentle. It was not sweet. It was fire and fury, a collision of all the words unsaid, all the emotions buried. His mouth claimed hers with desperation, hers answered with anger and longing tangled into one. For a moment the world ceased. No gossip, no cousin's cruelty, no Randall, no ruin. Only the truth of them, raw and undeniable. When they broke apart, both were breathless, trembling. This changes nothing, she whispered, though her lips still burned with his. It changes everything, he said, his voice fierce. But as passion stirred, danger sharpened its claws. Randall stood at the edge of the ballroom days later, his smile too polished, his eyes too intent. He had seen the shift in them, the glances that lingered too long, the tension that could no longer be disguised. And now, with proof that his schemes were unravelling, he found his target clear. If he could not topple Desmond through business, he would strike through Annette. She was no longer background. She was the Duke's weakness, his visible scar brought to life. Randall raised his glass, his smile thin. "So be it," he murmured to himself. "The Sinclair girl will be my weapon." Would you forgive someone who kept the truth from you to protect you, or would the betrayal be too deep? The kiss had ignited something Annette could no longer deny, but it had also lit a firestorm of fear in her heart. For nights afterward, she could not sleep without feeling the heat of his mouth against hers, the press of his hand at her waist. Yet the louder her heart beat for him, the more deafening the whispers outside became. It was everywhere now. In the markets, women looked her up and down, murmuring to their companions. At the tutoring hall, mothers clutched their children's hands tighter, their polite smiles stretched thin. Even in her own household, Monica's glares burned hotter by the day. And through it all, Desmond persisted. He came to her, again and again, his presence like a storm at her back. But for the first time, Annette began to step away. When he appeared at the schoolhouse gate, she did not rush to him. When he reached for her hand at a gathering, she folded her fingers into her skirts. When he whispered her name, she turned her face aside. Because deep down, a seed of dread had taken root. What if Monica was right? What if his attention destroyed her, just as surely as Randall's schemes had ruined her family? The blow struck harder than she imagined. It began with a whisper, a rumour Randall planted in the right ears, that Annette had been seen in secret rendezvous with him. Soon forged photographs circulated, blurred prints of a woman in lavender walking beside a tall man, faces indistinct but convincing enough. The society pages lapped it up. The Sinclair girl, two-faced, playing the Duke and his rival at once. When the papers landed on Desmond's desk, his hands tightened until the glass of brandy in his grip cracked. He stared at the photographs, his scar aching as memories of betrayal resurfaced, his fiancée, her lies, the ruin left in her wake. He wanted to believe Annette incapable of deceit. He wanted to. Yet the ghost of old pain whispered otherwise. That night, when she found him in the garden and reached for him, he stepped back. His voice was colder than she had ever heard. "Tell me it isn't true." Her heart fractured. "You think I could? After everything? Answer me." Her tears spilled, hot and relentless. "No, I have never touched him. I have never wanted him. It is only you, Desmond." But the shadow in his eyes did not lift. Then why do these exist? He thrust the photographs into her hands. She stared at them, shaking her head in disbelief. "They're lies. Can't you see? Randall made this. You of all people. How could you doubt me?" Silence stretched between them, sharp as glass. And then finally he spoke. "I have trusted once before. It cost me everything." The words struck like a blade. Annette staggered back, her chest hollowing out. "Then you never truly saw me at all." The world collapsed around her. By morning, the families of her students sent notes of dismissal, polite on the surface but lined with shame. They could not trust their children to a woman branded a liar, a fortune hunter, a scandal. Monica wasted no time. She stormed into Annette's room, her face gleaming with triumph. "Do you hear it? The whispers? They'll never let you back in. You've humiliated this family for the last time." She pointed to the door. "Leave. Take your pitiful things and go." Annette gathered her few possessions, a worn shawl, a book of poetry, the silk scarf Desmond had once sent her, and stumbled out into the cold streets. Days bled together in grey misery. Gossip consumed her name. Shopkeepers turned her away. The whispers followed her wherever she went. That's her. The Duke's plaything. The girl who thought she could climb too high. At night, she slept in Lucille's small spare bed, clutching the scarf until her knuckles whitened. But even Lucille's kindness could not hold back the tide of despair. In the still hours, Annette whispered to herself, To be invisible was safety. To be seen has destroyed me. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she remembered his voice. I see you. It haunted her, that first moment when she had felt alive. And now, it mocked her as she lay broken, stripped of every scrap of dignity. Desmond sat alone in his study, the firelight casting cruel shadows across his face. The photographs lay discarded on the table, their lies gnawing at him. He wanted to burn them, to crush them, to undo the doubt that had festered in his heart. But the scar on his temple throbbed, reminding him of past betrayals. Still, he could not silence her voice in his memory. It is only you, Desmond. The conflict tore at him, between the man who had vowed never to trust again and the man who had felt her kiss and believed, if only for a moment, that love might heal the ruin. Annette stared out of Lucille's narrow window one evening, her breath fogging the glass. Somewhere in the city he lived still, cloaked in power and ice. And she, cast into the gutter, wondered if her life would ever have meaning again. She had wanted to matter, to be more than invisible. But perhaps she had been foolish. Perhaps to be seen was only ever to be destroyed. Tears slid silently down her cheeks as she whispered to the night, maybe safety was all I deserved. If you were Annette, would you walk away to protect yourself, or fight for Desmond even if it meant ruin? Comment below. The days that followed Annette's expulsion from her cousin's house felt like walking through fog. Aimless, cold, suffocating. Each morning she woke in Lucille's small spare bed with the heavy ache of a life unravelling. Her tutoring work was gone. Her family name, once just obscure, was now synonymous with scandal, and Desmond had turned from her at the very moment she most needed him. She told herself to forget him, to protect what little remained of her dignity. But her heart betrayed her. Every street corner where his carriage might appear, every shadow that stirred at night, made her chest tighten with impossible hope. It was in Lucille's kitchen that the spark of change came, in the most unexpected way. Lucille had gone to fetch firewood, leaving Annette alone. On the table lay a bundle of papers, hastily shoved into a worn leather satchel. She recognized it as something Lucille's brother had dropped off, a pile of discarded scraps from his job at the printers. Annette opened it absently, flipping through the smudged pages, and froze. Among the scraps was a letter, one not meant for public eyes. The signature at the bottom was Randall's, the ink pressed heavy as though he had meant to leave his mark indelibly. Her pulse quickened as she read. The letter detailed instructions for payments, for debts disguised as investments, for pressure placed on her father's once thriving ventures. The words were cruel in their precision. If Sinclair balks, remind him of the forged note. He'll bend. He always bends. Annette pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. It was proof. Proof that her family's ruin had not been misfortune but sabotage, orchestrated by Randall himself. Frantically, she sifted through the other pages. More contracts appeared, counterfeit ledgers, letters of debt, all bearing Randall's name. The pieces fit together like jagged glass, slicing through her chest with every realization. She staggered back from the table, her heart racing. For so long, she had believed her family cursed with folly. She had carried shame that wasn't hers, humiliation that had scarred her very soul. But here, in ink and paper, was the truth. Randall had destroyed them. And Desmond, he had known. He had warned her without words, had shielded her with his silence until proof could be found. Her breath came fast, harsh. She had doubted him, pushed him away when she should have seen what was true all along. He hadn't simply noticed her that night in the ballroom. He had chosen her, despite the ruin, despite the whispers, despite every reason not to. And now she had to choose him. The decision hardened in her chest. Annette pulled her shawl tightly around her shoulders and fled into the night, the satchel of letters clutched against her like armour. The city was cruel in the dark, the gas lamps casting long shadows, but she did not falter. She knew where she had to go. Desmond's mansion loomed tall and forbidding, its iron gates sharp against the glow of lanterns. The guards at the entrance looked at her with surprise, their eyes darting to her shawl, her simple dress. But there was something in her gaze, fierce, unyielding, that made them step aside. She entered the grand hall, her footsteps echoing against marble. A butler approached, but before he could speak, Desmond appeared at the top of the staircase. He froze. She froze. For a heartbeat, the silence between them was unbearable. Annette raised the satchel with trembling hands. I know the truth now. They met in his study, the heavy curtains drawn tight against the night. She laid the papers before him, her fingers shaking as she spread them across the desk. His eyes swept the words, his jaw tightening with every line. I should have trusted you, she whispered. I let my fear blind me. But it was never me who was weak. It was Randall who destroyed us. And you knew. You carried that burden for me. You let me hate you because you thought silence was safer. Desmond's throat worked as though he swallowed broken glass. I feared you would despise me more for keeping it hidden. I thought if I let you close, he would use you to destroy me. Tears stung her eyes. And instead, I destroyed myself by doubting you. He stepped around the desk, stopping just before her. His voice was raw, stripped of all its armour. Annette, I am not a good man. I am ruthless. I am feared. But when I saw you that night, standing in shadows as though you were nothing, I couldn't let it be true. I saw the girl who bore shame that wasn't hers, who endured cruelty she didn't deserve. And He broke off, his chest heaving. I saw the only thing that has made me feel alive in years. Her tears fell freely now, and I saw the man beneath the mask, not the Duke, not the monster, just a man who could break, who could hurt, who could still choose to protect. And I can't pretend anymore that I don't. Her voice faltered, but the truth burned through. That I don't love you. The silence shattered between them as he pulled her into his arms, his mouth finding hers with desperate urgency. This kiss was different. No longer fire against fire, but fire finding its home. Passion surged, but beneath it lay something stronger. Recognition, acceptance, love. When they finally pulled apart, foreheads pressed together, he whispered, If you choose me, Annette, there will be no safety. They will come for you too. Her hand rose to his scar, her thumb tracing the line with aching tenderness. Then let them come. I would rather face ruin with you than safety without you. By dawn, the satchel of Randall's letters sat locked in Desmond's drawer. They both knew what it meant. Randall would not yield quietly. He would strike harder, more viciously than before. But they were no longer divided. They were no longer uncertain. As the sun bled into the horizon, Desmond looked down at her, his eyes fierce with resolve. Tomorrow, Randall faces my board. He thinks he owns their loyalty, but with this, he touched the satchel. We will strip him bare. Annette straightened, her chin lifting. Then I will stand beside you. No more shadows, no more invisibility. If he wants to destroy me, he will have to face me first. For the first time in her life, Annette did not feel like a ghost. She felt like a force. Together they would face him. Would you risk everything to stand beside the one you love, even if it meant becoming a target yourself? The morning of the board meeting dawned grey and heavy, the sky swollen with clouds that promised storm. Annette woke with the unease of someone who knew the day would decide everything, her name, her family's honour, her heart. She dressed simply, her shawl pinned tightly at her shoulders, and followed Desmond into the carriage. The silence between them was thick, but not the silence of doubt. It was the silence of two people gathering strength. His hand brushed hers briefly, not with passion, but with promise. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The Duke's boardroom was a cavern of polished mahogany, walls lined with portraits of men whose legacies weighed heavily on the present. Today, the long table was crowded with shareholders, advisors, and men who lived and breathed in the shifting balance of power. At the far end of the table, Randall sat in a dark coat, his smile gleaming like a blade. He rose the moment Desmond entered, voice pitched to command attention. "Gentlemen," Randall announced, his gaze sweeping the room, "we gather today to protect our interests. We can no longer ignore what plagues this house. The Duke," he gestured sharply toward Desmond, "is corrupt. He manipulates accounts, twists investments for personal gain, and now parades a ruined woman before society as though she were fit to be mistress of his estate." Murmurs rippled through the board, some brows raised, others whispering in agreement. Randall had prepared his theatre well. Annette's stomach tightened, but she did not flinch. She watched as Desmond's face remained stone, icy calm, but she knew the tension beneath. This was Randall's game, and he was striking with every weapon at once. Randall slammed a folder onto the table, papers spilling across the polished surface. "Here is proof, ledgers, contracts, letters, all signed with Desmond's hand. Proof of his theft, his deception. He will bleed this house dry, and the rest of you will fall with him." The room erupted in noise, shouts, disbelief, demands for clarity. Randall's smile widened, smug and certain. It was then Annette stood. The scrape of her chair silenced the chaos. Her heart thundered, but her voice rang steady. "That is not proof. That is forgery." Every eye turned to her. Randall's froze, shock breaking across his face before curdling into fury. Annette moved forward, pulling from her shawl the satchel of letters she had discovered. "Randall Hayes orchestrated the ruin of my family. He forged contracts, planted false debts, and used lies to topple us so he could rise. These documents bear his mark, his handwriting, his seal, the same hand that penned the lies you hold now." Gasps filled the chamber. Shareholders leaned forward, snatching pages as Annette laid them bare on the table. The truth spread like fire through dry brush, consuming the illusion Randall had built. Randall's composure cracked. "Lies," he shouted, his voice shrill. "You think they'll believe a nobody like you over me? You think a ruined girl and a scarred duke can stand against me?" He moved suddenly, too suddenly, lunging across the table, snatching for the letters. Annette stumbled back, her breath catching as his hand closed around her wrist. His voice dropped to a hiss, but the room heard every word. "Do you know why I ruined your family?" His eyes blazed, spit flecking his lips. "Because they were weak. Because they trusted too easily. Because I could. And do you know why I hate him?" His glare snapped toward Desmond. "Because he never bowed. Because every deal I tried to crush him with, he won. He humiliated me in front of men who once trusted my name. He stole every ounce of respect I clawed for, and then he dared to notice you." Randall's grip tightened on her wrist. "You were supposed to be the nail in Desmond's coffin, the proof of his weakness. The one thing he could never protect. I will not let you take this from me." Annette's heart pounded in terror, his grip like iron. But before she could cry out, Desmond was there. With a roar that shook the room, Desmond tore Randall's hand from her, shoving him back against the table. The crack of wood echoed as papers flew into the air. Desmond's fist followed, colliding with Randall's jaw, sending him sprawling to the floor. "You will never touch her again," Desmond growled, standing over him, every inch the Duke whose power had been feared for years. Guards surged into the chamber, seizing Randall as he writhed and cursed. The shareholders rose, some shouting for his arrest, others demanding he be cast from their ranks. Within minutes, Randall was dragged from the room, his screams of denial fading down the corridor. His empire of lies had crumbled in a single morning. Silence lingered after the storm. The shareholders looked to Desmond, to Annette, to the truth scattered across the table. And then Desmond stepped forward, his eyes not on them but on her. His voice carried, deep and steady, reverberating off the panelled walls. This is the woman I choose, before all of you. Not because of her beauty nor her name, but because she has faced more ruin and cruelty than any of you can imagine, and still she stands. She is no shadow. She is no scandal. She is my equal, my anchor, my heart. The words struck through the chamber with undeniable force. Annette's breath caught, her tears spilling freely now, not from fear but from overwhelming release. For the first time, she was not invisible. She was not pitied. She was not mocked. She was chosen. The boardroom broke into divided whispers, but it no longer mattered. Desmond took her hand, pulling her into his side as though sealing his vow. The storm had passed, not without scars, not without pain, but with victory. Randall was disgraced. The truth was free, and the world had seen them stand together, unbroken. If you were in Annette's place, would you have dared to stand up in that boardroom, or stayed silent to protect yourself? The storm that had darkened their days finally lifted. Randall was gone, dragged away in disgrace, his empire of lies dismantled in front of every man who once whispered his name with reverence. In the silence he left behind, Desmond and Annette remained standing, not broken, not diminished, but together. The city itself seemed to sigh in relief. Whispers that once carried venom now carried awe. Carriages lined the streets not with rumour but with curiosity. Everyone wanted to see the woman who had dared to stand in the boardroom, who had spoken truth against a man of power, who had refused to bow even when her very name was dragged through the dirt. Annette found herself walking through streets that once avoided her. Heads turned not in scorn but in acknowledgement. Children pointed from windows, women whispered, and men tipped their hats. She was no longer invisible. But she did not feel her worth in the stares. She felt it in her own chest, in the steadiness of her steps, in the calm certainty that she had survived ruin and found her voice. A week later, the Duke hosted a gathering. Not a ball for spectacle, not a board meeting filled with sharp smiles and false words, but a quiet evening meant to bring peace back to his house. The estate glowed with candlelight, warm rather than imposing, the grand halls softened by laughter and gentle conversation. Annette walked at his side, her hand resting on his arm. She wore no jewels save for a single sapphire brooch Desmond had pressed into her palm earlier, a promise rather than an adornment. As they entered, silence rippled, but only for a breath. Then applause filled the hall, not for him but for her. The sound shook her to her core, her throat tightening with tears she fought to hold back. Desmond leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. They finally see what I have always seen. Her hand trembled against his arm. And what is that? That you are not shadow. You are light, and I was a fool to ever think myself whole before I knew you. Her eyes shimmered as she turned to him. Desmond! But he silenced her with the softest touch of his fingers, as though he feared she might doubt. His gaze, once cold and guarded, now burned with something unshakable. I love you, Annette Sinclair. Not for what you endured, not for what you revealed, but simply because you are you, and I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never again wonder if you are seen. Her breath caught, the world narrowing to the space between them. Around them voices murmured, candles flickered, music swelled faintly. But none of it mattered. She whispered back, tears slipping free. And I love you, Desmond Hawthorne. Even when you hid behind stone, I saw the man beneath. I choose you, always. And then he kissed her. It was not the desperate kiss of the night they confronted Randall. It was not the hesitant brush of lips that came with doubt or fear. This was a kiss of certainty, of unbroken vows, of a future built not on secrecy but on trust. The hall erupted with quiet cheers, some soft clapping, but the two of them were lost in their own world, sealed in that moment. Later that night, when the last guests had gone and the house had fallen silent, they walked together into the gardens. The city skyline glittered beyond the hedges, a tapestry of lights against the deep velvet of the sky. Stars blinked faintly, but it was the lanterns of the city that illuminated their path. Annette paused, gazing out over the world she once thought had no place for her. Her shawl slipped from her shoulders, but Desmond was there instantly, drawing her close. "Does it feel different?" he asked softly. She tilted her head against him. "Yes. Not because they see me now, but because I finally see myself." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "That strength was always there. I only wish I had told you sooner." She smiled, her eyes reflecting the shimmer of the lights. "Perhaps the timing was right. I had to fall before I could learn to rise." He turned her gently, tilting her chin so she would meet his gaze. His voice was low, reverent. "And now that you've risen, Annette, I swear, I will never let you fall alone again." Her heart swelled until it ached, and for the first time in years, that ache was not pain. It was fullness. It was joy. Together, beneath the glittering skyline, they sealed their vow with another kiss. No crowd, no applause, only the truth of two souls that had been tested and had chosen, without hesitation, each other. She thought she was unseen, until love made her visible and unforgettable, forever. Do you believe even the coldest heart can be melted by love? Share your thoughts below.